Hello and welcome to Unpacking Terms. The term we're going to be unpacking today is task. And so what I'll present here is a simplified version of the great work by many scholars in task-based language teaching, TBLT. A task is essentially an activity that reflects real language use. What do we mean by that? Well, when we communicate in the real world, we focus on meaning. There is a gap between interlocutors. We don't know what the other person will say. There's usually a concrete outcome. We're asking questions or we're trying to get information for an actual purpose that is not to practice language. And we accomplish our task by using any available linguistic and non-linguistic resources. In other words, when we communicate, we simply express and interpret meaning as needed. Sometimes we need to use circumlocution. Sometimes we may need to use gestures. And I do want to clarify that even though I selected this icon that reflects oral interaction or people talking, tasks are not limited to pair work and they're not limited to interaction. You can have input-based tasks, for example. And my favorite definition of task comes from Michael Long, who said, "Tasks are the things people will tell you they do if you ask them and they are not applied linguists." And again, you see the emphasis on real language use. There are many different types of tasks. Here, I'll talk about the most common ones. Infogap tasks are those where one person has information that the other person needs. It can be one-way or two-way. A one-way infogap task is when one person holds all of the information that the other person needs. A two-way infogap task is when one person has half of the info and the other person has the other half. Some examples of infogap tasks are describe and draw, spot the differences, giving directions. And so in all of these cases, there is a concrete outcome. So if I'm giving you directions and you have to mark the route on a map, that is the outcome. You were able to trace the route and arrive at the destination. And then decision-making, opinion, problem-solving tasks usually involve planning, discussing, or coming to a consensus while taking into account a specific situation or certain constraints. For example, planning a party or planning a trip given a specific budget. Other examples would be pitching an idea for a product, for example, deciding who to hire out of a series of candidates. And all of these tasks, to some extent, resemble real language use. Now, are they identical to what happens in the real world? No. They are adapted to the classroom. And this is precisely the distinction that Michael Long made between real-world and pedagogic tasks. It also echoes the distinction that Bachman made between situational and interactional authenticity. Situational authenticity refers to what actually happens. For example, if a student gives directions to a speaker of the target language on the street, it's as real as it gets. And then there's interactional authenticity, which involves using the same real-life communicative functions, but of course, it happens within the context of the classroom. For example, one student provides directions to another student, and the student marks the route on a map. It is not identical to what happens in the real world, but it involves the same communicative functions. Now, all of these tasks are indeed tasks according to TBLT. However, VanPatten doesn't quite agree with it. He would say these are not real tasks. Why? Because for him, these tasks are not respecting the context of the classroom. Students are students. They're not lost on the streets. They're not tourists. And so asking them to pretend to be any of these things ignores the context of the classroom, and thus this is not true communication, but language practice. And Lisa and White provide the following example of this contrast. Planning an imaginary trip is a classic TBLT decision-making task. However, Lisa and White say that this is ignoring the context of the classroom, where students are students and they're not going on a trip. Instead, what they propose is something like figuring out who would be a good travel companion. So the outcome of the task is simply to figure out if a fellow classmate would or would not be a good travel companion, and is authentic because the learners are sharing their own real travel preferences. And for me, the takeaway is don't lose the forest for the trees. Instead of being so concerned with whether you are following VanPatten or TBLT's definition, go back to what matters. Are we helping our students develop communicative ability in the target language? As far as I know, nobody would say that a task such as planning a trip together or giving directions to someone is not contributing to language development. Nobody's saying that. And so if your goal is to help the students develop language skills that they can use outside of the classroom, then don't worry so much about whose definition you're following, and instead focus on giving them opportunities for purposeful exchange of information, and you'll be on the right track to helping them develop communicative ability in the target language. There's still a lot more to unpack, so be sure to subscribe. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time.